Hello, hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Black Remembering podcast, where we highlight the heavy and the hope. This episode of our Black Remembering podcast welcomes a very special guest, Dr. Patricia DeMarco. Thank you for coming on to the show, Dr. DeMarco.
Thank you for having me. It's delightful to see you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a little bit about Dr. DeMarco before jumping into today's episode. Dr. DeMarco is a Pittsburgh author with a doctorate in biology from the University of Pittsburgh. She spent a 50-year career in energy and environmental policy in both private and public sector positions. She now writes and lectures in the fields of sustainability, energy and environmental policy, and natural history. She sits on the board of trustees for Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens and for the Allegheny Land Trust. She is also a principal associate in the Main Street Associates, headquartered in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Now, we're honored to have you, Dr.
Well,
DeMarco.
thank you. It's delightful to be here.
And we met each other at the Black Appalachian Coalition's first in-person policy summit at Simmons College this past July. I remember sitting next to you in one of our workshops and hearing your commentary and thinking, oh, okay, so this is somebody who's like actually done the work with a capital W and not just sitting in the back. Oh, so that was pretty cool. I've mentally deemed you as our lunch and learn guru, so I hope that's okay. I'd like to start these episodes out by doing a little vibe check. So I would love to know, this is kind of a existential question, but what gives you hope?
Well, I'll tell you, it is that there are so many young people who are really dedicated to looking at a life of service instead of a life of capitalism. I meet more and more students who say, I want to grow my own food. I want to raise kids in a place where they know their neighbors. I don't want to be just on the treadmill trying to make the mortgage and, being in a money driven world. I meet more and more young people who feel that way, and that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And it also encourages me to continue fighting for preserving the living earth, for one thing, and for preserving their future. Because the things that we're doing today are really going to determine the fate of the next generation.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What's your story? And what social or political hurdles have you overcome?
Well, I'm first generation Italian. So I was raised in an Italian patriarchal family. I had a godmother who picked out my husband when I was in 7th grade. And of course, he and I looked at each other and went, no. But I lived through that generation where we were doing the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement all at the same time while I was in high school and college, mostly college. And so I was in the period of time when social activism was really part of the daily life. I mean, I lived in Pittsburgh in the time when the air was so black that the streetlights were on at noon. And you washed your curtains every 3 days because they would get black. And you can imagine what your lungs were like. So I really became interested in environmental issues out of a long experience of knowing that, it didn't need to be this way. And this isn't the right way for people to have to live. And all the way through from, I was involved with the group against smog and pollution before they were really an organization. And it really was important to know that when citizens get together and stand up for what they believe in, you can actually change the law. And all of the Environmental Policy Act initiatives that happened in the early 70s were really a result of a massive amount of citizen outcry. I mean, thousands and thousands of people went in the streets and marched. I don't think you could even do that today because they don't permit those kinds of things, and we become numb. But back in the 70s, when you had, we sat down on Fifth Avenue and stopped all the streetcars for 3 days. It's like plop, 1,000 students sitting in the street. These kinds of things are good training ground because it proves to you that being a citizen is not a spectator sport. It's an active obligation, really, and you need to exercise your rights and your obligations as a citizen to engage in the process until it does what you want it to do.
Thank you. I love what you said about it not being a spectator sport.
Yeah.
One of my revered mentors said that one of the most dangerous things to be is complacent, and
Yep.
I think we all get to a point where like everything's cool, and my personal life is like livable, and I'm kind of content walking through my day to day, and that's not really how we progress or anything changes. So thank you for saying that.
Well, if you're too comfortable, you're not making progress, right?
Right.
You asked me about socio-political problems. Well, first of all, being in a patriarchal system where you're expected to get married and have kids.
Mhm.
And I wasn't the firstborn son, I was the firstborn daughter. So my brother came along, and of course, he's the little prince. You So I had that to deal with. But we're good friends. I mean, I don't remember when there wasn't Michael because we're really close. But I was a woman in a man's world. I chose to go into energy and environmental policy. And I've worked in the energy industry where there have not been a lot of women in the 70s. There were very few women peers in the energy and environment space. I worked for a utility company. I worked in the government. And there were very few women peers that I could relate to and that could mentor. So that was an issue. The glass ceiling is very real, and I feel like my fist went through when I figured it didn't matter anymore, and I didn't care what they did to me. So, I mean, I'm a 4 times cancer survivor, so I really don't care. They can't do anything to me. I, can put my fist through the ceiling, and it doesn't matter. So, um, that to me, I think, took a lot of separation from the expectations of my family. That you have children and you're a mother, and I am a mother, but that isn't the center of my life. And I worked, even when my kids were small, I was working part time. Even if it was volunteer work, I always was engaged outside of the house as well. And that was a departure from the norm. Most of my cousins didn't do that until later in their life, you know. So
Got to get busy living or get busy dying. That's what
that's right. That's right.
I have 80-year-old neighbors who are more active than anyone else in the neighborhood, and they often say that.
Hmm.
So, would you tell us a bit about petrochemicals, what they are, and how they show up in our daily lives?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we started this series about is that we realized that, especially in frontline communities, a lot of those neighborhoods are in the shadow of facilities that make or are using uh, fuels, oil, gas, coal, which are the petrochemicals. They are fossil remains that came from millions and millions of years of pressure under the earth, and they're being mined and extracted to use to burn. So, what we're doing is we're burning things that were sequestered millions of years ago, releasing that carbon dioxide in a short few decades all at once. And so it's having an effect on the composition of the atmosphere at this point. And that's where climate change and global warming is coming from, is that the amount of carbon dioxide acts like blankets. It's like you're putting blankets on top of blankets on top of blankets. And so, of course, you get hot. And it prevents the sun's rays from going back out into space. And it also holds in the heat that does come. So one of the problems with petrochemicals is that burning them is contributing to climate change. And this is tracked back to the Industrial Revolution, which is when that sharp curve of increase in carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere began to really steeply rise. And now we're facing a situation where if we don't bring a halt to that increase, we are going to find ourselves in living conditions that are not habitable for most of us on most of the planet. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that petrochemicals are used for fuel, but they're also used in products like plastic and pharmaceuticals and synthetic fibers and, you know, packaging, especially food wrapping. And a lot of the materials in these petrochemicals are not really good for you. They have health harms. When you burn them, you get air pollution that causes asthma and a whole bunch of other issues. It gets into the water, and you end up with endocrine disruption in our bodies because these things behave like hormones. They're very small concentrations will behave like hormones. And so you have a lot of sources of contamination of our environment from using these fossil materials for fuel and for substances that we use every day.
And we interact with these on a daily basis, like the crop tubs of butter that we reuse and like put food in and store and heat up, and it was never meant for that.
Well, and when especially if you put things like butter in plastic, the oil dissolves the petrochemicals into it. And if you drink water out of a plastic water bottle that's like you buy water in a big tub and it's been kept in a place where it's warm, the plastic in that bottle will get into the water. And when you drink it, you're absorbing some of that plastic into your body every time you drink that water. And so you look at the water that comes out of your tap versus the water that comes out of the bottle, and you have to balance which one is safer. You know, put the water out of your tap through a Brita filter or something, and you're more likely to have it be safe.
So even when we're trying to quote unquote do the right thing for the environment, like buying reusable water bottles, we could be buying something that's still harming us.
If you buy reusable bottled water bottles that are not plastic lined or plastic, you're fine. You know, they make them out of aluminum, they make them out of stainless steel,
Okay.
and so you can get the kind that don't dissolve into your water, you know, and we talked about this on the I think the Water is Life session of the Petro Lunch and Learns, and you can go into that in a lot more detail. I would encourage people to look at the Petro Lunch and Learn toolkits that are mounted after each session. We've had tremendous amount of material compiled, um, which Ben Hunkler from Ohio River Valley Institute has helped us with to pull them into toolkits. And I've been amazed at how much material has been archived really on this subject in case people want to know more about it. It's an important subject. And one of the other things that bother me a great deal is that the regulation of petrochemicals to protect the health and safety of people has been a hard-won battle, and it's difficult to increase the regulatory restrictions as we discover more about the effects of these things. So when you say, oh my goodness, they're making this into a pesticide, we really shouldn't be using this at all because it's wiping out the butterflies and the pollinators. Getting things like that removed from the market once they're in the market has proven to be practically impossible, partly because the industries have so much influence over the regulatory process that it's difficult to change.
Thank you. I'm thinking of how I bring petrochemicals and their harms to my family in a way that like convinces them to care, because some of the most cynical people who are a part of my loved ones, they'll be like, well, there's like a more immediate crisis, like I need to worry about like paying my water bill instead of what I'm drinking water out of. So how do you tend to convince people to care?
Right. Well, it's difficult. And that's why I think it's important to have the lived experiences because people, you know, who've had neurological change because of the endocrine disruptors they're exposed to from living in the environs of a place that's making plastic, you know, when they talk about what they experienced, you really have a hard time pushing that aside. It's like we are not possibly in the most direct line of harm, but if you talk to people who live in Baton Rouge or live in Clairton or live in the shadow of the Appalachia Shell Plant in Butler, you know, they can't move. they really don't have the wherewithal to just pick up and move away. You are stuck living there, and that stuff comes down on you on a daily basis for generations. And this kind of thing really has a long-term chronic effect on people's health. And it isn't disputed anymore. It's pretty well recognized in the medical field. We've had Dr. Claire Cohen come in and talk about her practice and the mental health burden of people who are in the shadow of these facilities for their lifetime.
I can imagine it being like a vicious cycle of being exposed to these harms, and then your health is impacted. You have
Mhm.
medical bills that you may or may not be able to pay. Family members who pass away
Yeah.
from the effects. Like it's a vicious cycle. It's yeah. So lived experiences to attest to how
Mhm.
these petrochemicals are impacting people in real life, day to day.
And I think that's one of the most exciting things that we've had in this Petro Lunch and Learn series. We try to have on every session one or two people talking about their own lived experience in the issues, because it's a lot more powerful than data and statistics. The stories actually matter. And you believe people when they tell you, well, I don't know what you've heard, but this is what happened to me, then they believe it, you know, and it's true, that people do have experiences that when you average them out, oh, all of these people within this sphere, only four, well, that's me and three of my friends, then it makes a difference. Yeah, every person matters. You can't just throw away those four people because it isn't statistically, significant.
Got you. So tapping into that empathy and that oxytocin whenever we connect to another human. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. So I heard a little birdie told me that you've seen 4 policies implemented in the span of 2 years. So will you tell us more about the policies and the work that it
Yeah.
took to get
The,
them?
the Black Appalachia Coalition is part of the Reimagine Appalachia initiative that happened starting in 2019. And this was really an initiative that began with a lot of listening sessions where we were listening to people who were in the Appalachian states of Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, and hearing, well, if you don't want plastic hubs up and down the Ohio River, what would you do instead? And they had a lot of good ideas. If you were going to give $6 billion to our community like you did to Butler for that shell plant, I'll tell you what we'd do. And they told us. And we took it down and we organized it into working groups. And we wrote all those issue papers that became the Black Appalachia Blueprint, including Black storytelling in Appalachia. And it was important because we invited the congressional staff in the committees of interest to come to our working groups. So while they were working on the Build Back Better plan for President Biden right after he got elected, we are spoon feeding all of this information that we heard from the people back into that process. And so when they were writing the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure and Jobs Bill, the CHIPS Act, and the American Rescue Plan, a lot of the ideas that were in the Reimagine Appalachia Blueprint ended up being incorporated into the law. And one of the ones that I was really most excited about was in the Inflation Reduction Act, where we heard many, many times people saying, they give a lot of money to these companies, they do a project. When they're done with the project, they just go away and we're left with the mess. And they said, there should be strings attached. And so there actually ended up being language in the implementing regulations of the Inflation Reduction Act that say for every $1 million of taxpayer money, 15 to 20% has to go directly to the community where the project is located. And the community gets to tell you what they want. This is a revolution. They had no idea how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They couldn't even write the rules. People were running around trying to figure out what to do with this. But the people in whose communities these projects are going, they have lots of ideas. They know exactly what they want to do. Don't build us a soccer field. We need to take down these decrepit houses and put up better housing. We need better transportation so people can get to work without having to drive a car. Things like that. And this kind of thing, I think, is really amazing in that in 2 years, I don't know, a lot of people say President Biden is sort of shaky and too old. He got so much done in one term because he knows how that process worked. He was in the Senate for most of his adult life, and he knew whose strings to pull and how to pull things together. And we got 4 pieces of legislation passed that are affecting the climate future, that are affecting manufacturing in America, made in America, made to last, and that are actually doing good things to reinvest in communities that have been abandoned and forgotten. And I think it's going to have a tremendous impact if we have 4 more years to put this into motion and implement further.
It's almost like this. It sounds so simplistic when you say you actually went into a community and see what they needed and like listen to the people in the community, but it's something
Ah.
a lot of people don't do, and that's kind of wild, but also revolutionary. I think a lot of organizations have this savior mentality, like we know what's best, and we're going to come in and we're just going to plot this down. But what I'm hearing is that y'all went in and y'all actually sat down, had listening sessions, took that information and did something with it, like something actionable, and got these programs and policies passed. So
Yeah.
kudos to y'all. And that is
There was a lot of people. I mean, we had 45 listening sessions with over 1,000
ooh,
people from 4 states. And because of COVID, we had to do most of it on Zoom, which was a blessing in disguise because, first of all, people can't travel. So we got, I think, a broader mix of people than we would have had if we'd had to hold them. Plus, we got people from all the different states at the same time talking to each other. And the other thing was that it revealed the weaknesses in the internet system. You would be, well, we can't hear you, we can't see you, our internet's unstable. So we began pulling that out as an issue. These rural areas of Appalachia do not have good internet connectivity. How can you expect people to be part of the modern world? And so the CHIPS Act helped to address that. And the Infrastructure Act helped to address that because we were able to pull that out in stark form. I mean, when you have half of the people on your webinar not able to engage because the internet goes out, and we got bombed a couple of times of people being funny, but for the most part, it was very engaging. And I know there were some extremely capable moderators. None of us knew how to deal with Zoom that much at the beginning. I mean, I was terrified. I was like, oh no, I have to talk on this little box. I'm trying to figure out how to teach on Zoom, because they sent all the students home in the middle of the semester. I'm just like, and so it was, I think, a very important thing to listen to people first before you start developing the policies.
yeah. Now that you say that, I've noticed some libraries in my neck of the woods of Appalachia have started doing like Wi-Fi mobiles where they'll go into the mountains and valleys and they'll just set up a station for anyone who like can't leave or may not have transportation access to get to the public library.
Mhm.
You can also like check out Wi-Fi routers. So I may be wrong, but I don't remember seeing anything like that before the pandemic forced us to connect on Zoom.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let us see. So would you give us a preview, just a little sneak peek of the next lunch and learn event?
Well,
What is
we have an amazing session coming up. We're going to be talking about environmental justice, and the really exciting part is that Dr. Jalone White Newsom, who is the federal chief environmental justice officer in the White House Council of Environmental Quality, she is going to be with us as our main speaker, talking about the EJ40 initiative and how that has happened and how it has been infused into all of the operations of the government administration, and some of the effects that that's had, and how environmental justice has really become a central concern of the Biden administration and hopefully going forward. Then we have Sonia Kikeri, who is the National Director of Policy and Civic Engagement from the Emerald Cities Collaborative. And she's going to be talking about some of the ways that environmental justice has been incorporated into what she's doing. And Reverend Dinkins is going to be talking a good bit about our initiatives here at Black on the uh, holding people to account. You know, the petrochemical industries have gone scot-free for decades and decades. And so we're focusing on health as a human right, and also on the Petrochemical Accountability Act, the Polluters Accountability Act. And I will be giving a little bit about the green jobs future, and that if we're going to make a new, clean, green jobs economy, we can't repeat the same problems of the past. We have to make it a clean manufacturing system and a circular manufacturing system, so that we don't go from raw material to trash and just poison everybody on the way. So it's going to be an amazing session, and I hope people do tune in and join us on the 19th of September at noon on Zoom. And you can register right online. There's a registration link running under this banner.
Yes, please join us. Thank you so much, Dr. DeMarco. And don't be afraid to like bring your lunch to the Lunch and Learn.
Yeah, you can bring your lunch. We
Most,
should do that for an icebreaker, is ask people, what are you having for lunch? Come put it in the chat.
oh, and there's a Lunch and Learn on September 19th as well as one on October 17th. So
Right.
please go ahead and register for both of those, y'all. Oh, Dr. DeMarco, I'm grateful that we've met, and I'm hoping to stay in community with
Oh,
you.
yes.
Would you leave our listeners with a bit of advice, a little nugget of wisdom?
Follow your passion,
Ooh.
because if you are doing something you love and you're leading a purpose-driven life, you're never bored, you're never tired, and you never wake up in the morning wondering what to do next. So I've tried to retire 3 times. It hasn't worked at all. I find that I have lived a purpose-driven life most of my life, and that purpose has been to save the environment for the next generation. And everybody thinks I'm crazy, because how can you do that all by yourself? But you know, every hand at the end of every finger gives you a big bunch of people. So you need collaborators, you need friends, you need colleagues. So find your passion, find people who share it, and just go for it.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will have our next Lunch and Learn again on Thursday, September 19th at 12 p.m. Please remember that a healthy environment is necessary for healthy people, and Black is partnering with the Ohio River Valley Institute on this series of Lunch and Learn workshops. So go ahead and tune in, bring your lunch, and get fed in more ways than one. Thank you for joining us, Dr. DeMarco.
Thank you so much, Nita. I'll talk to you soon.
See you. Peace.